What's up, everybody? This is Chris at A Reader's Journey, and today I'm going to be talking about my favorite books that I read in 2024. I have 8 here, so it's not quite a top 10. I just tried to pick out the ones that I'm most excited to talk about, and I've tried filming this video a few times already, and for different reasons. Once I forgot to turn my mic on. And then the last one I tried to record was over an hour long, so I'm not going to do that this time. I'm just going to try to stick to why I love these books and not. I always end up trying to, for some reason, give a summary of the books, even though a lot of these are popular on Fantasy Booktube. And these are not ranked in any way. I'm just going to be doing it in sort of like a rough order of when I read it throughout the year. And yeah, these are the books that I love the most in 2024. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the A Wizard of Earthsea, which I read from this beautiful collected illustrated edition that my younger brother gave me for Christmas last year. So I picked this up in, I'm pretty sure it was January of 2024, and I had never read Ursula K. Le Guin before, even though I had heard so much about how incredible an author she is or was. And this was the first book I've ever read by her. And this is, it has a lot of your classic fantasy tropes, but it probably was one of like the early originators of a lot of these. We have an early magic school, a coming of age wizard with powers coming into his own. Anyway, what I liked about this, the world was really interesting and to me original. It's sort of set in like this archipelago, like these islands, so there's a lot of sea travel in between different parts of the story. And there was, surprisingly to me also, I didn't know there was a lot of the people in this book are dark skinned. They're not like classic white European inspired fantasy. My cat Kiki's right here. If I glance over to this side, that's what I'm looking at right now. She's chewing on her treat bag. I'll give you some, Kiki. But yeah, so the world is really cool. The story I loved, but I think it was Le Guin's writing that stood out the most to me. Of all the books on this list, or all the books I'm going to talk about, I think she's the best or my favorite sentence level writer. So just the way she puts sentences together, word choice, syntax, the rhythm and flow of her sentences, everything feels so intentional and purposeful and beautiful. So if you're wondering if this, I'm petting Kiki right now, one of these like more classic fantasy series still hold up, this really does incredibly well. I was surprised at how well, and I'm really excited to keep reading books in this series. And I think I will pretty soon in 2024. I'm going to read Tombs of Atuin, which is book 2. Okay, so that was definitely one of my favorites this year. I'm going to go through these a little bit quicker than last time I filmed this. And then another book I got in the beginning of 2024 that I had heard a lot about, and you probably have too, is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. So this is one that I heard a lot about over the last few years as one of the best fantasy series of all time. It's completed. We have multiple trilogies or series, so we have these closed off arcs, but then this broader series. Anyway, I expected to like the writing at least, and I think it is also really famous for, or celebrated for, how closely connected you become as a reader to the protagonist, Fitz. In the books that follow him, I know other series follow different characters, but I was really moved by this first book in the series, and again surprised at how well, in sort of older, or I guess what some would deem classic fantasy series, how well it holds up, and about how connected and how much I cared about the main character, Fitz, and everything he goes through. And then I just did want to touch on what I found most meaningful in this book to me was the theme of connection versus disconnection. You know, there are like these different types of magic in the world where Fitz can connect to other people or animals, and it's a really vivid, visceral, emotional experience. And then on the flip side of that, what I felt was like a thematic antagonist, if that makes any sense at all, was disconnection, where what's going on in the broader world. Not only do we have these like Sea Raiders type of group coming in and I guess killing some people in the mainland, but also, mild spoilers, they're doing things to them that magically take away their empathy or their like sense of caring about other living things, or living in a way where they care about other people or even their families. I hope that's not too big of a spoiler, but it was the standout part of the book for me, was that theme of connection versus disconnection. And just empathy is the most important part of living to me, you know, connecting to other people and other creatures and the world around us. I thought was really, really fascinating, Hobbes' exploration of that. And the story is awesome, the characters are great, the relationships are really, really good. But to me, I think it was like the thematic exploration that stood out. So I really want to keep reading. I just got Royal Assassin for Christmas. So I'm going to pick that up soon in the new year. I'll go ahead and talk about my next favorite read of 2024, which it was The Grace of Kings by Qin Liu. So this is one that I think has soared in popularity the last few years on Fantasy BookTube, at least the part that I follow. And I had heard this book feels a little bit more like, not a history book, but there is like a little bit more psychic distance or a zoomed out perspective on the world and the characters within it, in this like Asian inspired fantasy world. But that didn't bother me at all. I guess some people felt like it was a little bit dry or a little bit removed from its main characters, but I thought it was fascinating. Just this like, this Kiki's tale. Hey Kiki, settle down somewhere, please. Yes, okay, you probably already heard of Grace of Kings, but why I loved it, I occasionally love to read like a straight up history book, and sort of like that broad sweep, you know, of wars and revolutions and how that affects the people of different lands in different eras. And this does that, and you know, it has that broad sweep, that epic narrative, but it also brings in some fantasy elements. You know, I guess it's a little bit debatable whether gods interacting with mortals, you know, qualifies as fantasy, or if that's something else. Kiki. But and fantastical, but also like I call it like second world elements, which kind of gets folded in with fantasy. But I just thought it was a really interesting version of a world where technological advances are happening that can sort of parallel some of our own, but are explained in different ways or occur in different ways. You know, we have airships in this book. Later on, we have the advent of another really cool technological advance. So while not necessarily fantastical, it does have these like burgeoning second world technological elements. And then in addition to that like broad historical sweep, I really did love the main characters of this book. You know, we have these two, for the most part we follow these two revolutionary characters that are trying to fight against this empire and lead the revolution. You know, we have kind of like more of the sly, trickster-ish character, Kunigaru, and then Mata Zendu is like this he's from a fallen noble family. Again, I'm summarizing. But I really love these two main characters. and their journey from allies to where we eventually get to like Hamilton and Burr place, where after the revolution they part ways and are at odds with each other eventually. So the characters are great. The world is so interesting and so intricate and complex, and not something that you are probably used to if you've just been reading, I guess, classic fantasy. I know mainstream fantasy, we're getting a lot more, diverse voices and representation of different cultures, or worlds inspired by different cultures. And this, to me, is probably, I've only read book one, but other than the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee, I think this is my favorite, I guess non-traditional feels wrong to say, but I guess as these diverse voices are being represented in mainstream publishing and fantasy, I think this is probably the best version of it that I've seen. I'm not the most widely read, but Grace of Kings was incredible. I'll try to keep it to that. But I did also just get Wall of Storms for Christmas, book 2, so I definitely want to pick that up soon. I have a lot of book 2s that I'm gonna read in 2025, and that's a couple of them. And then, so this next book was, I think, my biggest surprise of 2024. I had heard about it, but I heard mixed things, and that is All Systems Red by Martha Wells, which is book 1 in the Murderbot Diaries. So these are novella length for the most part, I believe. And okay, what do I want to say about this? I was surprised at how much I loved this, because I don't always connect with humor in books. And I thought that the plot and the world building, I guess you could call it, were a little bit underdeveloped. I mean, these are novellas, and that's, I think, was a choice by the author to not like overdevelop and have this vast, complex, super sci-fi like elements to her world. It's just like a few hundred years in the future. Again, I'm summarizing. I'm just going to talk about why I like it. The main character of this book and the perspective and the voice of the main character, I connected to really deeply. Not only the humor, but because we have like, it's kind of, couched as this part human, part robot, so like a cyborg security bot in the future who's owned and controlled by this company or this corporation to protect, researchers out doing things in the planets. But while these cyborgs don't normally have full autonomy over their own bodies, they do feel a lot of the like physical sensations, but also emotions, and they're fully sentient beings in their own right, but they're treated as objects or as this other like non-entity really, by the corporations or the governments that they're controlled by. So, but our main character, who like tongue-in-cheek calls himself Murderbot, has freed themselves, hacked their governor module, and has achieved full autonomy, but hasn't told anybody, and is still going through the motions of doing their job. So we have this sort of like sarcastic narrator, but they're only sarcastic because they're uncomfortable around humans because of the way humans treat them, and doesn't want to be discovered, and also like dislikes humans for how petty they are. So I'm doing a terrible job of talking about this, but I love this because I connected with the main character so much, because I have a long history of social anxiety, feeling uncomfortable in certain social situations, and I just got out of a job that I worked for a very long time as a low-level employee with social anxiety in like a retail environment. And to me, I really connected with Murderbot because they are sort of forced into this situation. Not that I was forced into that job, but you just get stuck in these situations in life where you're uncomfortable, but you have to do it. You know, you don't, it feels like you don't have any other choice at the time. And sometimes you don't get treated very well. You know, not only by corporate structures, but by just the general public. And so I just related to that, like everything, all Murderbot wants to do is just like hibernate in like a rest or sleep pod basically, and like download TV shows and movies and read books and stuff, but has to go out and go through the motions of doing this job that they find meaningless and taxing, and people don't treat them well, and humans just kind of suck in general. You know, I won't go on and on about this, but I really connected with the point of view and the perspective of the main character of the series, and I ended up reading, I think, the first 3 novellas this year, but I just picked out All Systems Red, book 1. I think this had the strongest plot of all the novellas to me. Maybe it was because it was my first time reading the series, but for the other novellas that I've read, 2 and 3, they didn't have the strongest plot or, you know, the most developed complex world building in my reading, but the connection to the protagonist was so strong, and while humorous, it was surprisingly emotional to me. So I'm excited to keep reading. This might be the next book I read, is book 4 in the Murderbot Diaries. So one of my favorite reads of the year. I think it's the only science fiction book I'm looking at. Yeah, only sci-fi series that I read, I think, all year. But yeah, again, not everybody will connect with this, or not everybody does connect with this series in the way that I did. So, you know, maybe it's not for everybody, but I loved it. The next book that I picked up, and you know, I mentioned this in every video, but I started going back to school this year, at least, you know, at a 4-year university to get my bachelor degree. So over the summer and the fall, my reading slowed down, you know, my reading for fun, at least. So I picked up, right before the summer semester started, I picked up The Silver Blood Promise by James Logan, but I didn't get to finish it until like sometime in the fall semester. My workload slowed down, and I just got a weekend or 2, and I just finished it. Anyway, so this was a debut novel for James Logan, who I believe is like an editor, a major editor at Orbit UK, maybe? I forget where he works, but anyway, he's always wanted to write a book in the fantasy genre, and he did it. I've watched a couple interviews with him. Seems like a really cool guy. But if you haven't heard of this, it's sort of like an action-adventure fantasy. I'm not going to summarize. You've probably heard of it, but it's like Indiana Jones, but fantasy, you know, where we do have a character who's like quick-witted, smart mouth, a little bit roguish, investigating the murder of his father. That's as much as I'm going to say, because I'm not going to summarize, so this video will be super long. But I love this because while it is like a fun, fast-paced, page-turning sort of story, I thought the emotional storyline, or the emotional through line of this main character, who's sort of in self-exile, it's a bit of a redemption arc. You know, he like drinks and gambles, you know, his money away. He's a former noble. It's sort of a redemption arc for him, and his connection to other characters. We have like a street urchin named Flea that he becomes like best buddies with, and their banter and their relationship is really fun. And then we have another really cool thief character who becomes important as the story progresses, and so the characters and the storyline are really solid, but I also enjoyed the world building in this. It doesn't feel like the most, I don't know if epic is the right word. It's not an epic fantasy. It's sort of like, yeah, an action adventure fantasy, but the second world elements and the fantastical elements in this are really cool. You know, we have this ancient fallen empire that was really technologically advanced in weird magical ways, where artifacts are, you know, being hunted down and discovered, and they come into play in this story. The main character, his father's death will tie in with some of that stuff eventually. You know, so it's not just action adventure. It does have really cool fantasy elements. It has magic. It has monstrous creatures, and it does have these really weird entities or occurrences that start coming in to the story in interesting ways, and it all ties together with the main character and his journey. That's probably all I need to say about that. It was just a really fun fantasy book that I read this year, and I mean, James Logan is an awesome author, so if you're just looking for something fun that kind of has like a faster reading pace, I would suggest The Silver Blood Promise. Let's see, I got 3 more here. Hey Kiki, what's up? You wanna hang out? What are you gonna do? Go over there? You can hang out if you want. Okay, so the next book, I made a video about this trilogy, but another one of my favorite reads of the year. This is book 3 in the Divine Cities trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett, and that is City of Miracles. I read book 1, City of Stairs, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, and then I read City of Blades, which is book 2, 3 or 4 years ago, I think. That's just, I don't know, that's something I do with series. I don't know why, but it took me until this year to read City of Miracles. But yeah, I didn't pick up book 3 of this trilogy until this year, but I'm so happy I did. This is one of the coolest, most original fantasy series I've ever read. It's a finished trilogy. It's sort of like an espionage spy thriller take on the fantasy genre, and again we have like non-traditional European fantasy inspired, or you know what I'm trying to say. We have different cultures that are represented, you know, through a fantastical lens. It's a second world, but if you're looking for something different that's a little bit more, I guess it moves into a modern era. You know, we have like early automobiles, telegraphs I feel like are in this book, if not telephones. Does it have rifles? I feel like it has rifles. Yeah, but anyway, strikingly original fantasy world. Really interesting thematic exploration going on with colonization, repression or suppression of culture, religion and spirituality, and also just like international politics, but through the lens of this spy thriller. I mean, it has amazing action sequences, but it also does slow down into more like investigative storylines. I don't really know how much I need to say about this, but if you're looking for something in the fantasy genre that's different, that's original, it's a little bit more, I guess, modern in the era that the story takes place in, its world, but also just a more modern take on what you can do with fantasy, I would read the Divine Cities trilogy, and City of Miracles is an incredible conclusion to this trilogy. I can't recommend it highly enough. Some of the coolest fantasy, I don't even know, I guess that's the umbrella term for it, but it's like magic comes from these supposedly dead gods, but maybe some of them aren't dead. Anyway, go read this series. It's incredible. One of my favorite reads of the year. Okay, I've got 2 more. I talked about this one before, but Bringer of Dust by J.M. Miro is book 2 of the Talents trilogy. So book 1, Ordinary Monsters, came out a few years ago. Ordinary Monsters, I think, is still my favorite book of like the last 5 years. It's like a Victorian X-Men or Victorian Stranger Things is what I tell people. You know, it takes place in London, Scotland, different parts of America, and even like Japan in the mid to late 1800s. Just super quick, it's these kids are born with supernatural abilities around the world. They don't know why, they don't know what to do with it. In the 1800s, but it's sort of like historical horror, but I read it more as fantasy because it does have like a lot of lore and world building, and the characters function more in like an epic fantasy kind of way than a typical horror novel. You know, we have like a found family dynamic, we have the struggle of good versus evil. Yeah, it's a lot more nuanced than that. But yeah, I think, for my money, I think the Talents trilogy, which only the first 2 books are out, I'll just say for me, it's my favorite ongoing fantasy series right now. And again, I'm not the most widely read in the fantasy genre, but for my tastes and preferences, this is the one that I love the most. And yeah, some people might say classify it as horror, historical horror, historical fantasy, I don't know. It does take place in our world, but I love it. And Bringer of Dust was amazing. We have a lot of new characters, but we also follow some of our favorite characters from book 1. It continues like the thematic exploration, not good versus evil, but like innocence and vulnerability of these kids who have these, you know, powers, and the forces in the world or from other worlds that are trying to take advantage of them, kill them, manipulate them. So there's this really interesting theme of like when people are othered because they are different, and you know, that leads to that like found fantasy or found family dynamic. We have all these like outcasts and exiles have to band together and save each other, but by the end of this book 2, like they're having to put their lives on the line to save the world, basically. It's a little bit like a smaller scale than that, but things are expanding, deepening, and yeah, by the end of this second book, it's getting to that epic, like the world is going to be at risk potentially in book 3. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I think J.M. Miro is one of the best sentence level writers right now, not only in fantasy. And again, I don't read everything, but I just think he's an incredible writer. I think the prose is elevated to a level that a lot of things that I read are not written at that level. It's incredible. I can't recommend it highly enough. Go read it if you want something a little bit creepy, but has a lot of tropes from epic fantasy, like I mentioned. There's a little bit of a chosen one. You know, there is sort of a good versus evil. We have monsters. We have this like I've already talked about it too much. Go read Ordinary Monsters and then read Bringer of Dust. They're incredible. And then the last book, and I just finished this a few days ago, and it became one of my favorite reads of the year, was book 2 of the Edan trilogy by Philip Chase, and that is The Prophet of Edan. So I read book 1, The Way of Edan, last year, and I take forever to get to sequels, and this was just another instance of that. But I'm so happy I picked up The Prophet of Edan this year. I thought it was a huge, book 1 was awesome, but I thought this one, right from the beginning, right from the prologue, was a huge level up in terms of scale. You know, the first is kind of like this slow build into a war that breaks out, whereas this one starts in the middle of a war, and we're sort of on the losing side of this war of religious conquest. So, you know, it feels like that Saving Private Ryan, you know, at certain points in Band of Brothers, like we're on the side of a war that's just getting their asses kicked. You know, people are dying left and right. Cities are being destroyed. There's a dragon on the back cover. Our side does not have dragons. The enemy side does have dragons. So if you want to know anything about how that feels, read the prologue. The prologue will give you a sense of what this entire book feels like, where we're in this intense, visceral, action-packed, like a city under siege by dragons, basically. And you know, there's mass destruction and chaos and terror, and our characters that we're following are just fighting for their sheer survival. You know, in the midst of that, we do have a main character who has been gifted / cursed with this power that has not been seen in the world in a long time, and he, Dayraven, is sort of the only chance this world has. I'm gonna try not to give too many spoilers, but I guess read the prologue and it'll give you a sense of what the entire book feels like, roughly. And that was, I think, why I love this so much, because it was so intense, and the side of the war that we're following does experience setback after setback after setback, and you think maybe they're going to win this battle, maybe this ambush that we're planning, our side is planning, is going to go right, but like just defeat after defeat after defeat, and it's brutal. And you know, we do our side, I guess I identify with this side a lot. It's the main side that we follow in this war. There is a hope, but it's like dwindling by a bare thread for most of this book. And we have like our main characters in this magical, not a training montage, but he's trying to master these powers that have been put upon him, placed within him, you know, outside of his control. But he has to take responsibility for it and try to master it so that he can, so that there is any hope or any chance of for eventual peace, or so the entire realm here doesn't get defeated by these religious fanatics. So yeah, I loved it because it was so intense and visceral, and yeah, not only because of that, but because I think Philip Chase, who is, everybody, if you are watching this video, you probably have heard of Philip Chase, one of the best fantasy booktubers out there, incredible author. This series so far is exploring religion and spirituality in really interesting ways. I think with a depth and a focus that might not happen like to this level in a lot of epic fantasy or fantasy in general. You know, this is a war of religious conquest. I guess it is a power grab for some of the king and a lot of the nobles on that side of the war, but to me the most interesting aspect to this epic narrative is, I guess I would call it religion versus spirituality, or like this nuanced exploration of religion and spirituality, and what that means and how that interacts with politics and governments, institutions, but also, especially with our main character, spirituality, different forms of your spirituality. And he's on a hero's journey, and he goes through a lot of the stages we might have seen before, like Luke Skywalker, where it's sort of, I think, this Buddhist or Eastern inspired surrender to life and death, disconnect from your immediate human desires, feeling connected to all living and non-living things. So just this really, really interesting, deep and nuanced exploration of spirituality. But also you get magic from it, and it's awesome. And like they're incredible, like wizards fighting each other with, what do they call it? Wizard's fire, like lightning shooting out of their hands, all kind of really cool magical elements in these books. The dragons are freaking awesome. I don't know if it's been a long time since I read a book with dragons on this scale, and is written so, viscerally or intensely. I'm rambling. But this became one of my favorite reads of the year because of that exploration of religion, because of the intensity of the storytelling, and because of this exploration of spirituality and religion. And also, I love The Hero's Journey. I've read a little bit of Joseph Campbell. I've watched a lot of like his Bill Moyers interviews. They're all on YouTube, are incredible. And I find it really moving and meaningful, the stages of the hero's journey, but also, as an individual, but also I think the world still needs that narrative. People can kind of like scoff or shrug their shoulders at stories like this, and they feel they might be overdone or overused, especially in fantasy. But I really think the hero's journey, especially like with a more, I guess, with updates, like a more modern take on the hero's journey from a new voice in fantasy, from a new author, with the events of the last 50, 60, 70 years in our world experience and taken into account. So I think, as time passes and decades pass, I really think that the hero's journey is vital, and what it means to us as individuals, but also to the world. I think the world needs it, and I think this is a beautiful version or exploration of that, feeling connected to all living things, sacrifice for others, for the greater good. It's not necessarily the right way to say it, I don't think, but anyway, that's enough rambling. If you're looking for this like classic fantasy but with a modern storytelling voice, I would go pick up The Way of Adan, but then The Prophet of Adan by Philip Chase. And I do want to pick up book 3, Return to Adan, soon in the new year. And I'm really excited to see what happens in that, because this book, without giving any spoilers, it wraps up a lot of narrative threads. And I've heard, but I also, this is my experience, it feels like this might be the end of the story in a lot of series. So I'm really interested to see where Philip Chase goes with book 3. I've heard a lot of good things. I've heard this series gets better with every book. So I can't wait to pick up book 3. So those were my favorite reads of the year. Mostly fantasy, one sci-fi, one sort of horror thing. If you've gotten this far in the video, thank you for watching. Thanks for following along with my reading journey. I want to put a video out pretty soon about, I don't do like strict TBRs, but what I'm interested in reading in the new year. I mean, here we have a lot of series where book 2 or book 3 I'm going to be reading early in the new year, but I also want to explore different genres and start new series. I can't help it. Anyway, I'll make a video about that soon. because I'm excited to read new things in the new year. But let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts on any of these books. What were your favorite reads of the year? If you have any thoughts on anything in general. But yeah, thanks for following along with my reading journey, and I wish you well in your own. So thanks for watching.